I work with things most people never see. Not secrets in the dramatic movie kind of way. Paper, folders, boxes that smell of dust and cardboard and old glue. I work in an archive. My job is simple on paper: sort, describe, preserve. In reality, it means spending long hours alone with the traces of other people's lives. Birth certificates, receipts, war letters, love letters, complaints, lists, things that once mattered enough to write down, and sometimes, very rarely, something that feels like it was written for you. This story starts on one of those days that was supposed to be ordinary. The air in the repository was cold enough to sting my nose when I breathed in. The ceiling lights hummed quietly, a sound I usually stop noticing after a minute or two. On that day, it felt louder than usual, like the building itself was trying to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I logged into the system, checked the queue, and saw a new entry waiting for processing. Accession 24-197, private family collection, anonymous donor, 8 boxes, no restrictions, no restrictions. That was unusual. Most private donations came with conditions. Do not open until 2050. Do not publish personal letters. Keep names confidential. But this one had none of that. Just 8 plain boxes on a metal cart parked near my workstation. The labels were handwritten in thick blue marker. Box 1, household papers. Box 2, correspondence. Box 3, photographs. Box 4, legal. Box 5, MISC. Box 6, oversize. Box 7, not to be opened. Box 8, not to be opened. I stared at the list, then looked again. Box 7 and Box 8 both had the same note in the same hand, but the intake form still said, no restrictions. I remember thinking, that's probably just the donor being dramatic. I've seen worse. Boxes with cursed written in all caps. A file labeled, do not touch or you will regret it. Usually it was someone trying to be funny or venting about paperwork. Still, something tightened in my chest when I read it. Not to be opened. But they were here, in my care, and the form said otherwise. I pulled the cart closer and started with the safe choice. Box 1. For a while, everything was normal. Gas bills, insurance policies, shopping lists, handwritten recipes with stains where something had splashed onto the paper. I put on my cotton gloves, checked dates, sorted items into smaller folders. The family name wasn't clear at first. Different surnames appeared in various places: married names, maiden names, signatures that changed over the decades. But one name appeared again and again, in old ink and new ballpoint: Rowan Hart. The earliest record was a birth certificate from 1893. The latest was a utility bill from 2018. The Hart family had covered more than a century, and somehow it had all ended up here, in my quiet corner of the world. I normally enjoy this kind of work. It feels like arranging the pieces of someone else's puzzle, except you never see the whole picture, just fragments. But from the moment I saw Box 7 and Box 8, I kept glancing at the cart. The tape on them was thicker, darker. The marker ink had bled into the cardboard, as if it had been written long ago and absorbed slowly over time. Or maybe I was just imagining things. By lunchtime, I'd finished a preliminary pass through boxes 1 to 3. I could have stopped there and continued the next day. Instead, I found myself wheeling the cart closer again, my hand reaching for Box 7. Someone had gone over the flaps multiple times with clear packing tape. It peeled up in long, resistant strips, crackling in the cold air. The box made a soft sound as it opened, like a breath held for too long finally escaping. Inside were just 2 things: a thick, dark green folder with no markings, a smaller flat envelope, sealed and on it, in neat black ink. For the archivist, when the time comes. I froze. It was such a specific phrase. Not for the family, not for the future, not for whoever finds this. For the archivist. I sat down slowly, the envelope resting in my hands. Someone at some point in the past had assumed this box would end up in a place like this, in front of someone like me. It could have been a coincidence, People know archives exist. They know papers go somewhere after they die. But the way it was written, calm, direct, almost conversational, made it feel uncomfortably personal. I checked the time on my screen. 12:47 p.m. There was no sound but the building's low hum and the distant rattle of a cart in another aisle. I looked again at the envelope. When the time comes. I slid a finger carefully under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded into thirds. The paper was smooth, slightly yellowed at the edges, the way modern paper looks after a couple of decades. I unfolded it. The first line made my mouth go dry. If you are reading this, it means the Hart collection has finally been opened after I asked, again and again, that it not be. I frowned. There were no restrictions noted. Clearly, whoever wrote this had wanted some. Clearly, they hadn't gotten their way. The letter continued. I understand how systems work. I know papers are processed when donors send them, and labels go on boxes that don't always match what's inside. So I am writing directly to you, the one person who will read this. The Archivist. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, even though there was no one else in the room. My name is Elena Hart, and I am the last of this line. When I am gone, everything you see around you will be all that remains of us. But there is something in our family history that does not belong in a database or on a shelf. It belongs with you. I need you to make a choice. The air felt heavier, as if the ceiling had lowered by a few centimeters. I kept reading. In the green folder inside this box, you will find a series of documents that will not make sense at first. Some will look like records, some will look like letters, some will look like nonsense. But if you follow the order I have drawn on the first page, you will see what I saw, what my father saw, what my great-grandmother tried very hard not to see. When you are finished, you must decide whether these pages stay here or whether they disappear. I know how wrong that sounds. I know what archivists are trained to do, what you believe in. I believed in it too, until I didn't. Start with the map. You will recognize the building. I read that last line 3 times. You will recognize the building. I reached into the box and lifted the green folder. Inside, clipped at the front, was a single page with a title at the top in neat block letters. Order of reading below, in black ink, a numbered list. 1. Map, 1923-2. Incident report, 1924-3. Letter, undated 4. Note on scrap paper, 1951-5. Transcript, 1987-6. Log entry, 2003-7. Final note, undated, unsigned. I flipped the page. The first sheet behind it was a map. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The lines were precise, drawn with a ruler. Measurements ran along the sides, notes written in a neat architectural style. There were rooms labeled Stack 1, Stack 2, Reading Room, Office, and then my stomach dropped, because I did recognize the building. It was the archive I was sitting in. The map was dated June 7, 1923, in ink at the bottom right corner. The building's name was different then, and the surrounding streets had old names I'd only seen in records. But the bones of the place were unmistakable. The central corridor, the stairwell, the windowless storage rooms arranged like cells. My workstation sat somewhere on that grid. If I put the map on the table and aligned it with the walls, I could probably point to the exact spot. But that wasn't what made my hands shake. Near the back of the building, in the area marked for closed stacks, there was a small square with a handwritten note beside it. Room 7. No door. No door. I turned the page and found the second document on the list, an incident report. The heading was formal, typed on an old machine. Internal report. Records storage facility date. March 3rd, 1924. Prepared by W. Whitlock. Senior archivist, I read. At approximately 9:15, Assistant Clerk J. Abernathy failed to return from the closed stacks after being sent to retrieve box number 144B from room 6. At 9:27, I proceeded to the stacks. The corridor was empty. All doors were closed. Box 144B was found on the cart at the end of the corridor, already retrieved but unsigned. I called out for Abernathy. There was no reply. After a search of all accessible rooms, including the stairwell, basement, and cooling room, there was still no sign of him. At 9:43, I returned to the cart. Box 144B was no longer there. In its place was a single index card, blank except for 3 words written in pencil: "Not this door." I recognize Abernathy's handwriting. After notifying the director, we conducted a second search in a full building sweep. Nothing unusual was found. Abernathy's coat and personal belongings remained in the staff room. It is the opinion of the director that Abernathy left the premises through an unmonitored exit. I do not agree, but I have signed this statement. Attached, updated map of closed stacks, noting room 7 on the plan as inaccessible. Floor space present, no door found. I looked back at the map. Room 7, no door. I knew that section of the building. We just called it the back wall. There was nothing there but solid concrete, painted the same dull color as everything else. But on the map, the wall was a lie. Behind it, on paper at least, was a room. I took a breath and turned the page. The third document was a letter, written in slanted, careful handwriting on thin paper. To whoever is reading this, I am not supposed to write any of this down. The director says it was an unfortunate misunderstanding and that we are to move forward. But we have all heard it now. It started 3 nights after Abernathy failed to turn up. We were closing for the day when we heard footsteps in the closed corridor. Light ones, like someone trying not to be noticed. We thought it was a researcher who'd gotten lost. But when we went back there, it was empty. The second time, Mrs. Hargreaves swore she saw a man pushing a cart at the end of the hallway, then turning toward the back wall, the wall with no door. She yelled after him, but he didn't turn around. The cart sound stopped halfway. Then the next morning, box 144B was sitting on the director's desk. No log, no retrieval slip. We have checked the locks. We have checked the windows. We have checked the doors. There is no way in or out that we do not know about. And yet sometimes I hear him. Late, when I am the last one here, finishing the ledger. A cart rolling slowly, then stopping abruptly, as if the floor had simply ended. I do not know what happened to Abernathy. I am not even sure he is gone. But I know this. There is space in this building that does not belong to us. We only think we control it because the map says we do. MH, Assistant Archivist. I let the letter fall gently onto the table. This building has been renovated many times. Whole sections were demolished and rebuilt. Storage rooms were moved. Doors were added, sealed, added again. I'd always assumed the odd dead spaces in the floor plans were just outdated records. Rooms that had never been finished. Walls that had been shifted. But seeing the history lined up like this, a map, an incident, a letter, made it feel deliberate. I checked the next item on the list. 4. Note on scrap paper, 1951. The paper really was a scrap, torn from the corner of something else. The edges were rough. The writing was rushed, as if someone had jotted it in a hurry and stuffed it wherever they could. They say it's a story now, something that happened long ago in the old building. But the sound has started again, not the footsteps, the cart. Always the cart. It rolls, stops, rolls, stops. Like someone is moving through rooms that aren't there anymore. Today I found box 144B. We don't have a box 144B. Our numbers don't even go that high. I checked the catalog. Nothing. I checked the stacks. Nothing. When I went back to my desk, the box was gone. In its place was an index card. Not this door. They say I am overworked. Maybe I am. But something is waiting for a door that no longer exists. And I don't think it knows that. I rub my eyes. A story from 1924 was weird but explainable. Old buildings are full of gaps and mistakes. People disappear. They quit. They get fired. They leave without telling anyone, records get lost. Staff tell ghost stories to fill in the blanks. But this note was from 1951, decades later. Different staff, same box number, same message. I turned the page. The next item was labeled Transcript, 1987. This one had an official heading. It looked like part of an internal investigation. Interview transcript. Staff member L. Carson interviewer, Director M. Lang. Date April 14th, 1987. Lang, you said you heard something? Carson. Yes, not just heard it. I saw it. Lang. Describe it. Carson. It was late. I'd stayed behind to finish reboxing some of the fragile material in closed stack B. I was about to lock up when I heard the wheels of a cart on the floor behind me. I assumed it was one of the student workers. I turned around and saw a cart at the end of the row. Just sitting there. No one pushing it. Lang, you are sure there was no one there? Carson. Not at first. Then I saw... Lang. Take your time. Carson. From where I was standing, I could see straight down the aisle to the back wall. Only it wasn't a wall. Not exactly. It looked wrong, like the air was thicker there, like someone had smeared the edge of the room with their thumb. The cart started moving, on its own, slowly, toward that wrong-looking part of the wall. The closer it got, the more it seemed to shimmer like heat over asphalt. I wanted to move, to step forward, to stop it, but my legs wouldn't work. Then I saw a hand on the handle, just a hand. The rest of the person, if there was one, was blurred. It was pushing the cart, but somehow not attached. Lang, could this have been a reflection? Carson, reflections don't leave marks. Lang, what marks? Carson, when the cart reached the wall, it went through it. There was no sound, no crash. It just kept going into a space that isn't there. And for a second, I saw the outline of a door, just where the cart vanished. Not a real door, something like the idea of a door. Then it was gone. The next day, someone left a box on my desk with no catalog number and no retrieval slip. Inside was an index card. Pause. Lang, what did it say? Carson, you already know what it said. Everyone does. It's the same thing every time. Lang, for the record, please. Carson, not this door. I knew the hallway they were talking about. Everyone on staff did. We all joked about it. The creepy end of the stacks, the dead corner, the wall with mood. None of us talked about it seriously, though. Not like this. I looked at the last two items on the list. 6. Log entry 2003-7. Final note. Undated, unsigned. The log entry was printed from a computer system I actually recognized, an early version of the one we still used. Building maintenance log, digital entry date, November 3, 2003. Reported by J. Mills, issue staff have requested evaluation of wall stability at end of closed stack corridor 3. Observations, minor hairline cracks in paint. Uneven temperature near the wall surface, slightly cooler to the touch. No visible signs of structural damage, no moisture. Sound test, wall is solid, no hollows detected. Recommendation, cosmetic repainting only. No further action required. That was it. Dry, dismissive. The sort of routine note you'd read and forget in seconds. Finally, I picked up the last page. There was no heading, no date, just plain white paper with a few lines written in the center. The handwriting was careful, familiar. I realized with a small shock that it was the same hand as the letter at the beginning. Elena Hart's hand. I'm sorry to drag you into this. I know what it means to interfere with records, with history, but I also know what happens when people pretend not to hear the card anymore. We don't own stories like this. We just bump into them. And something in that empty room keeps bumping back. You are the archivist now. You work in this building. You walk those corridors. You've heard noises you tell yourself are the elevator, the pipes, the air system. Maybe you are right. Maybe I spent too much of my life reading old paper and seeing patterns where there were none. Or maybe like my great-grandmother, like Carson, like the ones who never put their names on paper, I've realized that sometimes the past is not behind us. It's beside us, waiting. I don't know what the right choice is. Destroy this folder. Keep it. Hide it inside another file where no one will ever find it by accident, or put it in the catalog and let the story keep going the way it always has. Just remember one thing. Doors are made to be opened. Walls are not. There is a difference. E.H. I sat very still. The building hummed quietly around me. The computer screen glowed softly on my left. The box, the folder, the map, the reports, all of it lay on the table in front of me like a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. And underneath it all, faint but unmistakable, I heard it, the sound of a cart, rolling slowly across the floor. At first I tried to rationalize it. It's a coworker, someone from another department. They're just not talking. They're wearing soft shoes. That's why I can't hear footsteps. Maybe they're listening to music in headphones. The wheels squeaked faintly. Closer. Then they stopped. The hair on my arms rose. If I turned my head, I knew what I would see. The closed stacks corridor stretching out, lights buzzing, shelves lined with boxes. The far wall painted the same dull color as always. Nothing else. I decided not to look. Instead, I picked up the envelope that had held Elena's letter. I checked the back, the inside, feeling for anything I might have missed. There was nothing. Then I noticed a faint gray smudge along the bottom edge of the green folder, like something had brushed it, like a wheel. It might have been dust. It might have been nothing. I stood up. My chair scraped the floor, the sound sharp and human in a way the slow roll of the cart had not been. I opened the folder again, scanning through the pages, making sure I hadn't imagined any of it. The map, the incident report, the letter, the scrap, the transcript, the log, the final note. All real, all physical, all in my hands. The printer in the next room started up suddenly, spitting out a loud line of paper, and I almost laughed at myself. The spell briefly broken. The world still worked. Machines still did their thing. People still printed emails. I sat back down and did the thing archivists are trained to do when feelings try to take over. I started describing. I opened a new record in the system and typed, Collection, Hart Family Papers, Sub-Series Green Folder, Unlabeled, Contents, Map, 1923, Internal Incident Report, 1924, Personal Letter, Undated, Handwritten Note, 1951, Interview Transcript, 1987, Maintenance Log Entry, 2003, Undated Personal Note, E.H. My fingers hovered over the keys. I thought about writing, relates to recurring reports of anomalous phenomena in closed stacks corridor at facility name. Then I imagined my supervisor reading that and calling me into her office with that tight, polite look she used when she didn't know whether to laugh or worry. Instead, I wrote, Scope and Content Note. Documents appear to concern a staff experiences and internal responses related to an unmarked interior space. Room 7, indicated on early building plans but with no corresponding physical access point in current layout. I saved the draft without publishing it to the public catalog. The system time-stamped the entry, 1312. The cart sound did not start again. For the next week, I told no one. I finished the preliminary processing of the Hart papers. I wrote normal descriptions for normal files. Tax returns, letters, school reports. I scanned photos of family gatherings, birthdays, a dog with a lolling tongue. The green folder stayed in my locker, wrapped in an acid-free cover, physically safe. Mentally, less so. The building did what buildings do. It creaked at night when the temperature changed. The lights flickered occasionally when the power dipped. The air vents whistled on windy days. But I started noticing patterns I hadn't before. The air at the very end of closed stack corridor 3 really was colder. Not dramatically, just enough that when you walked from one end to the other, You could feel a soft drop on your skin, like stepping from sun into shade. There was a hairline crack in the paint near the corner. Maintenance had painted over it, then it had slowly reappeared, like something written in ink under a coat of whiteout. Once, shelving a box on the very last shelf, I glanced at the wall and had the fleeting, ridiculous impression that it was not completely flat, that there was a fraction of a shadow just proud of the surface where no shadow should be. I blinked and it was gone. I started avoiding that end of the corridor when I could. It didn't always work. Archives are about physical order. If a box belongs at the end of the shelf, that's where it goes. One afternoon, I was reshelving a box. Not 144B, we don't have that number. Our system doesn't use letters. Just a regular box with a regular label. I pushed the cart slowly toward the back of the corridor. The wheels rattled over a small, uneven section of floor. As I reached the last few shelves, all the overhead lights flickered once and then buzzed back to full. I stopped. The wall at the very end of the corridor looked exactly as it always did. Smooth, flat, painted in a shade of not quite white that someone in an office had probably chosen decades ago. But for a moment, it felt like I was standing at the edge of something, not the end of it. Like there was more building where the wall pretended there wasn't. I forced myself to move. I shelved the box. I turned the cart around. I walked away. The wheels rolled, stopped, exactly in the same rhythm I'd read about in those old documents. When I reached the brighter, busier part of the stacks, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. There were people in the reading room, students, researchers, life. I went back to my workstation. The green folder was waiting in my locker, silent and patient. That night, long after closing time, I dreamt of boxes. In the dream, I was younger, though I didn't feel younger. My hands were the same. The building was not. Corridors branched and rejoined in ways that didn't match the map. Doors opened onto rooms that were sometimes full of shelves and sometimes full of nothing at all. Just emptiness, like the idea of a room, not the room itself. I pushed a cart slowly down a hallway that stretched farther than it should have. Every time the cartwheel squeaked, the walls on either side of me shifted a fraction, as if the building was breathing in time with the sound. At the end of the corridor stood a door with no handle. Not a wall, a door. Bare, blank, waiting. Someone was standing next to it, their features blurred, like a face in a photo taken with a shaking hand. They turned toward me. In their right hand, they held an index card. They extended it without moving their feet, the distance between us somehow shrinking and bending, so the card was suddenly within reach. I took it. On the card, in neat pencil strokes, it said, "Not this door." When I looked up, the person was gone. The door was gone. I was standing in my real workplace, in the real closed stacks corridor, facing the real blank wall. I woke up with my heart racing and a metallic taste in my mouth, as if I'd been breathing old dust. The dream lingered all morning, clinging to the edges of my thoughts like cobweb. By midday, I couldn't concentrate. I went back to my locker, took out the green folder, and brought it to one of the small side tables where we sometimes review sensitive material. I laid everything out again. Map, incident, letter, note, transcript, log, final note. I noticed something I hadn't before. On the map, near the little square labeled Room 7, no door, there was a small penciled mark I'd assume was nothing. A smudge maybe, or a stray line from the pen. Looking closer, I saw that it was actually a thin line leading from the room to the outer margin of the page, and at the very end of it, in tiny handwriting, too small to see without leaning in, were 3 letters, E-H. Elena had marked it. Not just on the fact list she'd written, not just in her notes, but on the map itself. I checked the date again, 1923. Impossible for her to have drawn it unless she'd been alive and working here more than 60 years before the letter she'd written to me. But the initials were in modern ink. They sat lightly on top of the faded lines, as if someone had added them later. Of course, she must have found the map and marked it herself. It was nothing paranormal. Just someone in the more recent past studying someone in the more distant past, the way I was studying her now. Still, the way the line led neatly from the sealed room to the edge of the page bothered me. Like a quiet invitation. I don't know at what point I decided I was going to do something I absolutely should not do. Maybe it was when I realized that keeping the folder in my locker forever was already a kind of decision. Maybe it was the dream. Maybe it was the way the building felt different now that I knew its stories weren't just about people, but about spaces. I told myself I was doing what Elena asked. I was making a choice. I waited until late, after most of my coworkers had gone home. I volunteered to stay a bit longer to finish some backlog. A completely true statement, just not the whole truth. The building dimmed as people left. Lights went off in offices. Doors clicked shut. Our motion sensor system leaves the stack lights on only when it detects movement. So as I walked down the corridor toward the closed stacks, the lights flicked on in front of me and off behind me, one by one. I pushed an empty cart. It was easier to justify being in the racks with a cart, even if it held nothing but a clipboard. When I turned the last corner and entered corridor 3, the air cooled a few degrees. It did that sometimes. Airflow. Poor circulation. I'd seen the maintenance log. I knew the official explanation. The wall at the end of the corridor stood where it always had. Solid, thick, unremarkable. I walked slowly, deliberately, counting the shelves, matching them in my mind to the lines on the map. 1, 2, 3. Halfway down, the motion sensor clicked and the light ahead flicked on, casting a flat, even glow over the boxes. 4, 5. The crack in the paint appeared, a faint vertical line near the right-hand corner. Maintenance would repaint it again soon. They always did. 6. I stopped a few meters short of the wall. The cold was more noticeable here, like a draft without wind. I took the folded map out of my pocket and opened it, aligning it with the corridor as best as I could in my head. If the measurements were accurate, then according to this plan, there should be another space beyond the wall, just wide enough for a small room. Room 7. No door. I did not have tools. I did not have permission. I had nothing but an old map, a handful of stories from dead people, and a lifetime of being taught that buildings are solid, logical things. I don't know what exactly I thought would happen. Did I expect the wall to dissolve? Did I expect to see a crack widen into a doorway? Did I expect nothing at all and to walk away secretly relieved? I did the only thing I could think of. I reached out and touched the wall. The paint was cool under my fingertips. The surface felt smooth, with just enough texture to remind me that it had been painted many times over many years. For a moment, nothing happened. Then very gently, I felt a vibration, not from inside the wall, but beneath my feet. The faintest tremor, like the building was clearing its throat. At the same time, far down the corridor behind me, a cart moved. I didn't hear it start. I didn't hear footsteps. I only heard the wheels. Roll, stop, roll, stop. The sound came closer with each pause, as if whoever was pushing it was taking their time. I kept my hand on the wall. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct told me to turn around, to see who was there, to prove to myself that it was someone real, a coworker, a night cleaner, a late researcher. But something in the way the vibration passed under my shoes, subtle and patient, told me that if I looked, I might not be able to explain what I saw. So I didn't. I stood there, palm flat on paint, facing a wall that a map insisted was a doorless room, listening to the slow, steady approach of a cart that belonged to no one on any staff list I'd ever seen. Roll, stop. The sound was very close now. If I turned my head slightly, I knew I'd see it in my peripheral vision. Roll. The wall under my hand felt less solid, not soft, not liquid, just thinner. Like the difference between tapping on a thick book and tapping on an empty box. My fingers tingled. The cart stopped, right beside me. I could feel the presence of it in the air. That slight displacement, the knowledge of a shape occupying space next to yours. Like standing next to someone on a crowded train without quite touching. I didn't breathe. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, right near my elbow, something slid under my hand. Paper. It was the most mundane, fragile sensation in the world. The crinkle of a corner of cardstock against your skin as it moves. Instinctively, I closed my fingers. They closed around the edge of an index card, cool and stiff. I pulled my hand back. The wall was just a wall again, solid, cool, breathless. I stared at my hand. The index card sat in my palm, slightly bent where I'd gripped it. On it, in pencil, were 3 words. You already know which ones. Only this time, they weren't. The writing was neat, controlled, and absolutely familiar. I'd been looking at it all week, in her letters, in her notes on the map. It was Elena's handwriting, and the message was different. This is not a wall. The lights flickered once. The cart, if it had ever really been there, did not roll away. There was no fading of sound, no footsteps retreating. There was simply the empty corridor and the gentle hum of the building systems. I stood there, index card in hand, feeling the shape of the words press into my skin. Then I did 2 things that, depending on how you look at it, were either very understandable or unforgivable. First, I backed away slowly from the wall, keeping my eyes on it until I reached the relative safety of the brighter part of the corridor. Second, I did not tell anyone. Not my supervisor, not my coworkers, not building maintenance. I went back to my workstation, put the index card carefully inside the green folder, and sat down. My hands shook a little as I added a new line to the draft description I'd been writing in the catalog. Additional note, processing Archivist. Folder contains 1 undated index card with message in the hand of Elena Hart. Context uncertain. I did not type the message itself. Not yet. I closed the system. The computer made a soft clicking sound, like exhaling. You might expect the story to end with some dramatic discovery. A secret room opened, a body found, a confession letter, a clear, tidy explanation. That isn't what archives are like. Most of the time, we live with unresolved stories. Records break off mid-sentence. Diaries end halfway through a year and never resume. People disappear from paper long before they disappear from the world. The Hart folder is like that. I still don't know what happened to Assistant Clerk Abernathy in 1924. I don't know what exactly my predecessors saw or didn't see when they walked those corridors. I don't know whether there really is a Room 7 or whether it's just the building's way of reflecting all the attention we've poured into that one stubborn section of wall. I don't know why Elena chose me, or any archivist, to make a choice she didn't feel she could make herself. What I do know is this: the map was real, the reports were real, the letters were real, the index card in my hand was real, and the wall at the end of closed stack corridor 3 feels different now when I walk past it. Not louder, not more dramatic, just aware. As for the choice, in the end I did exactly what she must have known I would. I kept the folder. I wrapped it properly in acid-free paper. I wrote a neutral professional description. I gave it a call number that fits neatly into our classification system, but is not obvious from the outside. It sits now in a box with other ordinary files. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never notice it. The catalog entry is there, but quiet, not hidden, not advertised, waiting for someone patient enough, curious enough, or unlucky enough to find it again. Maybe that someone will be you, years from now, scrolling through a database, clicking on a line because something about the wording catches your eye. Maybe you'll request the box, sit at a table in the reading room, and feel the building shift almost imperceptibly as you open the folder. Maybe you'll read the map, the incident, the letters, the notes, Maybe you'll decide I was overworked or superstitious or lying. Or maybe one evening when the staff are gone and the lights are low, you'll hear a cart rolling slowly somewhere deep in the stacks. Roll, stop, roll, stop. And you'll remember this. Some stories are not in the documents themselves, but in the spaces those documents describe. Rooms that do not appear on fire plans, doors that never quite existed, walls that are not entirely walls. I can't tell you what's behind ours. All I can do is leave the story where I found it. In a box, on a shelf, in a building with one more room than it should have, waiting for the next archivist to decide what should be opened and what should remain, forever, just on the other side of the wall. And that's everything I can tell you about this story. The papers don't say more. The walls don't say more. And sometimes silence is all the answer you get. If you made it to the end, thank you. There are many more stories like this one out there. Strange, unsettling, quietly terrifying. Stories hidden in old archives, forgotten rooms, abandoned places, and things people were never meant to write down. And that's what this channel is for. Here I'll be sharing eerie, unusual, and sometimes deeply disturbing stories. Not the loud jump scare kind, but the ones that stay with you. The ones that whisper rather than scream. The ones you remember hours later when the room gets a little too quiet. So if you like this